They said the war was fought with guns, bombs, and codes. They were wrong. It was also fought with rituals, symbols, and ghosts. Before we descend into the shadows, I want to ask you something. Where are you watching from? And what time is it there right now? Drop it in the comments below so I know who's joining me across the world tonight. And if you're ready to see how deep this really goes, hit that like button, share this video with one friend who loves Forbidden's history, and subscribe, because what you're about to hear was never meant to reach the public. Now, let's open the file that history tried to burn. In 1934, a man named Heinrich Himmler, one of Hitler's closest allies, founded a secret research division called the Ahnenerbe, meaning ancestral heritage. Publicly, it was a study of Germanic culture. Privately, it was something far darker. Himmler believed that the Third Reich could reclaim ancient powers, psychic control, sacred geometry, even the power of prophecy, through forgotten rites that predated Christianity itself. But here's where it gets stranger. Hidden within this labyrinth of occult obsession was an inner circle, a network of spies, scholars, and mystics working in the shadows of Europe. They weren't soldiers. They were seekers, archaeologists turned agents, linguists turned occult codebreakers. This was the Ghost Network, an invisible branch of Nazi espionage operating far outside normal military command, fueled by the belief that knowledge itself was a weapon. Himmler's obsession began years before the war. He was fascinated by the Thule Society, a secret group that mixed nationalism with occult philosophy. They believed ancient Aryans had been chosen by cosmic forces, and that symbols like the swastika were not just emblems, but keys resonating with invisible energies. When the Nazis rose to power, the Thule Society's ideas didn't vanish. They became the foundation of a state ideology. And its members didn't retire. They became informants, agents, and, in some cases, the very first occult spies. Imagine this: a dimly lit castle in Bavaria, its walls carved with runes, flickering candlelight over ancient maps. A team of researchers, poring over Sumerian tablets, seeking a lost language of the gods, not for history, but for power. Their mission wasn't academic, it was military. If you could decipher the codes of creation itself, Himmler believed, you could predict the enemy's moves, harness psychic energy, and control minds. And this is where the Ghost Network begins. One of the earliest documented cases comes from an operation codenamed Project Kronos. Ostensibly, it was a study of ancient timekeeping devices, sundials, calendars, astrolabes. But in truth, it was an effort to map points of resonance, locations believed to hold spiritual or magnetic significance. These sites, often ancient ruins or burial grounds, were targeted by Nazi intelligence for reconnaissance and ritual experimentation. Reports suggest that agents were dispatched to Egypt, Tibet, and even Iceland to locate these energy nodes. They carried radios, relics, and encrypted notebooks filled with sigils instead of numbers. They believed these places could bend fate itself. Some never returned. Others came back claiming visions of other worlds, voices from beyond the veil, and contact with unseen entities that guided their missions. At first, German High Command dismissed these reports as nonsense. But then something unnerving began to happen. In 1938, during a classified expedition to the Syrian desert, a team under the Ahnenerbe reportedly unearthed a stone tablet inscribed with astronomical coordinates that predicted solar eclipses and weather patterns years ahead with eerie accuracy. The data was later adapted into Operation Wustenwind, a series of desert campaigns that used occult forecasting to plan troop movements. Coincidence? Perhaps. But to the men inside the Ghost Network, it was proof that their system worked. Now, here's the psychological brilliance of it. While most intelligence agencies used fear and loyalty to motivate spies, the Ghost Network used faith. Agents believed they were chosen instruments of destiny, guided by invisible powers. Their loyalty wasn't to Germany, it was to the myth of eternal order. This made them almost impossible to break under interrogation. Among them was a figure known only as the Oracle of Leipzig. Her real name never appeared in official records, but declassified British documents mention her as a psychic consultant embedded within the German Abwehr. She was said to perform trance sessions, scribbling down coordinates and names that coincidentally matched Allied movements. Me-6 analysts dismissed it as psychological theater, until one of her visions correctly predicted the exact location of an Allied convoy in the North Sea. The Nazi command was convinced the occult could enhance intelligence. But there was another side to this, an internal resistance buried deep within the same system. Some German scholars, horrified by what the Ahnenerbe was doing, began leaking information to the Allies. These weren't ordinary spies. They were occultists fighting occultists, using coded symbols and rituals to pass secrets. And their network, too, began to spread, a mirror image of the Ghost Network itself, one driven by conscience instead of power. By 1941, the Ghost Network had gone global. They had operatives in London, Moscow, Cairo, and even Washington, D.C. Some were diplomats, others journalists, and a few were archaeologists working under the guise of academic exchange. But what united them was a strange obsession with patterns in chaos. They believed history followed hidden mathematical rhythms, and that by decoding these, they could foresee political shifts before they happened. This obsession led to the creation of the Schicksalskarte, or Map of Destiny, a massive document filled with star charts, human genealogies, and wartime statistics cross-referenced with ancient numerology. Only a handful of people ever saw it, but according to captured documents, it was consulted before every major Nazi offensive. The chilling part? Some of its predictions came true. When the Allies invaded Normandy in 1944, several surviving Ghost Network documents describe it as the unforeseen storm, an event that had not been accounted for in the Map of Destiny. It was their first major failure and the beginning of their downfall. But before the network collapsed, a final operation was launched, an attempt to harness spiritual resonance from ancient artifacts stored in Berlin's secret archives. What exactly they tried to do remains classified, but witnesses described a catastrophic fire, strange electrical surges, and men who claimed to see spectral figures in the smoke. Whatever happened that night, the Ghost Network went silent, and yet fragments of it survived. After the war, Allied intelligence recovered some of these occult archives and quietly integrated their psychological insights into early Cold War propaganda and remote viewing experiments. But that's a story we are going to tell next, where we'll uncover how these occult spies didn't just fade into myth. They changed the way modern intelligence agencies operate forever. Before you go, if you've made it this far into the shadows, drop an emoji in the comments so I know you're one of the real ones. And make sure to subscribe, because part 2 will take us even deeper into what these spies found when they stared into the void and what stared back. When Berlin fell in 1945, the world thought the flames had consumed everything: the armies, the ideology, the madness. But hidden beneath the rubble were files too strange to destroy. Files marked with symbols instead of swastikas. Codes written in geometric spirals, not German. They called them the Black Journals, and they were the last surviving record of the Ghost Network. Before we open those, take a second. Tell me where you're watching from, and what time it is where you are. It's always wild to see this secret history unfold across the world at once. And if you're new here, make sure you like, share, and subscribe, because this part isn't just about what the Nazis did, it's about what the victors decided to keep. In the months after the war, Allied forces launched Operation Paperclip, an effort to recruit German scientists before the Soviets could. What most people don't know is that occult researchers were also quietly targeted. Men and women who had worked on the psychic, symbolic, or psychological side of Nazi intelligence were quietly extracted, interrogated, and in some cases, hired. One such figure was Dr. Karl Maria Weister, an astrologer and code theorist who once advised the Enneagram. Captured in Bavaria, he was interrogated by American intelligence officers who initially dismissed his ramblings about spiritual telemetry. But when Weister correctly described the coordinates of a hidden Soviet listening post, information he could not have possibly known, the Americans paused. Within weeks, he was flown to the U.S. under a fake name. There, he joined a secret research unit, one that would later evolve into Project Stargate, the CIA's psychic spying program of the Cold War. To understand how deep this goes, you have to see how intelligence changed after World War II. Traditional espionage was about breaking codes, stealing documents, recruiting double agents. But as nuclear paranoia grew, so did the desire to control not just information, but perception. The mind became the next battlefield, and that's exactly where the Ghost Network's philosophy resurfaced. Hidden within those recovered Nazi journals were notes on symbolic influence, the idea that thoughts and emotions could be directed through symbols, logos, emblems, even language patterns. It was the occult version of psychological warfare. The allies, especially the British and Americans, realized that these ideas could be weaponized for propaganda. Soon after, the Psychological Warfare Division began integrating elements of these studies into early Cold War operations. Broadcast frequencies, imagery design, subliminal suggestion, all borrowed from what was once called spiritual resonance. It was no longer religion. It was science, no longer the occult. It was intelligence. But the story doesn't end there. By the early 1950s, both the CIA and the KGB had begun experimenting with remote viewing, the supposed ability to perceive distant locations through extrasensory perception. That classified documents later confirmed that these experiments were real, and that they traced their origins to captured materials from Nazi occult research. One former German operative, codenamed Falcon, became a consultant for both sides. He claimed to have developed a method called astral reconnaissance, a trance-based visualization technique used to gather military intelligence. The CIA dismissed it as fantasy until Falcon described the exact floor plan of a Soviet facility weeks before aerial reconnaissance confirmed it. By now, fragments of the Ghost Network existed on both sides of the Iron Curtain. The Soviets had their Department of Parapsychology, inspired by recovered Ahnenerbe notes. The Americans had MK Ultra, a program originally designed for mind control but expanded into psychic testing. The occult had gone global, dressed in lab coats, buried in bureaucracy. And here is the irony. While each side accused the other of dabbling in superstition, both were drawing from the same root, a Ghost Network's obsession with the unseen. But the question remained, what were they really trying to contact? In 1957, an MI6 officer named Edward Franklin Marsh disappeared in Egypt while investigating stolen Nazi relics. His last recorded telegram read, "They were right. It's not power they sought, it's communication." 2 weeks later, British agents found his notebook half buried near Saqqara. Inside were drawings of the Eye of Horus, concentric circles, and a phrase written over and over. They still answer. Some believe Marsh had uncovered evidence that the Ghost Network's spiritual communications weren't symbolic at all, that they believed they were in contact with an external intelligence. Whatever he found, MI6 buried it. The file remains classified. By the 1960s, the original members of the Ghost Network were either dead, absorbed, or forgotten. Yet their influence lingered in the architecture of modern espionage, from psychological operations in Vietnam to propaganda studies in the 1980s. Even the language of modern spycraft, shadow warfare, ghost ops, black sites, echoes their obsession with invisibility. Some researchers argue that certain post-war intelligence units, particularly the Gehlen organization in West Germany, secretly preserved the Ghost Network's occult archives. Reinhard Gehlen, the former Nazi intelligence chief turned CIA asset, was obsessed with mystical symbolism. His private files, declassified decades later, included several pages of runic diagrams and numerological sequences copied directly from unedited documents. Coincidence or inheritance? Then came 1973, a strange year in intelligence history. That's when the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency authorized full funding for Project Grill Flame, the successor to Stargate. The classified reports mention consultation with European mystics and heritage studies of Aryan esotericism. In plain terms, they were retracing the Ghost Network's path. Some of these experiments involved targeting psychic impressions at specific geographical coordinates, attempting to intercept thoughts or signals. And in at least one case, an experiment conducted in 1976, a test subject reportedly described a location filled with black stone pillars, a humming noise, and symbols that moved when you stare at them. The coordinates he gave: an abandoned Nazi bunker in the Bavarian Alps. At this point, it's impossible to tell where history ends and legend begins. But the Ghost Network's influence doesn't rely on evidence alone. It thrives in patterns. Why were so many intelligence programs obsessed with the same themes: mind control, remote vision, hidden symbols? Why did so many of their researchers reference ancient civilizations, from Egypt to Babylon? And why did declassified budgets in the 1980s include millions for non-conventional surveillance? It's as if the world's most powerful agencies were still chasing something they could never prove, an invisible current beneath reality, the same current that Himmler's spies once believed they could harness. In the end, perhaps the Ghost Network wasn't about psychic power or ancient gods. Perhaps it was something simpler, an idea that secrecy itself could become sacred. That knowledge, hidden long enough, would start to feel divine. And in that belief, both the Nazis and their enemies became reflections of one another, haunted by the same hunger to see what no one else could. Because in espionage, as in magic, the greatest trick isn't what you hide from your enemies. It's what you hide from yourself. So now that you've seen the shadows behind the war, I want to know, do you think the Ghost Network was real? Or just another layer of deception? Drop your thoughts below. And if you believe that some wars never truly end, they just move underground, hit that like button. Share this video with one person who can handle the truth, and make sure to subscribe, because our next mission will take us even deeper into the networks that still exist today. The Ghost Network may have vanished from history, but its echo is still watching.